Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a complete privilege to be here having an opportunity to speak at MacGill, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you. Also very happy to be involved and supporting Change Nation. You've heard Paul speaking, and I think we're all agreed that Paul has a very challenging and a very inspiring worldview. He comes at things from a particularly thoughtful perspective. And is providing what I think is really wonderful leadership to lots of young Ashoka Fellows all over Europe, as he is now Europe Director, but his reach is broader than that. So I think he's a wonderful presence to have, and we're always happy in GNO to support Change Nation, to support what Ashoka are doing, and also very happy to be supported by Ashoka. I arrived here on Wednesday, and this is my first foray into MacGill, and I found the papers fascinating. Of course, I quickly realised that it's not just the papers that are important. Socialising is very important too, and there is as much to be learned, at least, I think, from the social aspect of MacGill as there is from the papers. So though I arrived with a briefcase full of important tasks in a very task frame of mind, I quickly realised that participating socially was absolutely critical, and I was reminded of somebody who said that if you keep your head when all about are losing theirs, that you clearly don't understand the situation. So I joined in and have been joining in since. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of collaboration. I'm going to link back to something we were talking about last night, which is public service reform, public sector reform, and we also were focusing on this on Wednesday morning with Robert Watt and Paul Harron and Patricia King. Very interesting session for those of you who are there. I'm going to talk briefly about the opportunity we have to reform public services. I'm going to say a couple of things about what I think is involved in seizing that opportunity. I'm making an argument for putting the citizen at the centre of that reform. I know this is often said, but I think it's critical, not just as a way of achieving quality and cost effectiveness, but also as a means of giving us some kind of common premise, as a benchmark that we can measure the contributions of all concerned. And it's very important, I think. And finally then, I'm just going to give an example of the work we're involved in GENIO, which brings this beyond the rhetoric into reality and the part that we're trying to play in putting people at the centre of the design and delivery of services that they need to support them. Okay? So, the opportunity to redesign public services. I won't go on too much about this because I think it's been said a number of times this week. The main point I really want to make about this is that the economic boom allowed us the luxury of simultaneously funding some very enlightened initiatives while sidestepping nettles that needed to be grasped. And we generally did this by putting initiatives alongside, onto the margins of already expensive, large expenditure programmes. But the sharp contraction that we're now experiencing requires us to grasp these nettles, to meet these challenges. And of course, these are not challenges that are unique to Ireland. These are challenges being faced in other jurisdictions. And I think that the precept of John J. Chapman, where he talks about reform consisting of taking the bone from the dog, is a much safer guide for us than the kind of win-win optimistic sloganeering that we sometimes hear as we face into this challenge. So what's involved in seizing the challenge? Well, in a short few minutes, I'm not going to dwell too long on that, but I think the most important thing is to take the full measure of the challenge that's involved. My sense is that we have a number of oversimplistic assumptions and poorly thought through strategies which just won't serve us well, and I'll just itemise a couple of these so that we can try and put them to bed. One such assumption is that all we need to do is to demonstrate evidence of how to design services that are producing better outcomes more cost effectively, and that widespread adoption will just spontaneously follow. And of course, it's utterly naive to think that this might happen. Resistance to change is not going to gracefully surrender in the face of irrefutable evidence, and key stakeholders in this terrain are not disinterested empiricists. Another common assumption is that investment in expensive, professionally staffed services automatically translates into good outcomes. And while it is certainly true that many of our innovative and committed leaders are indeed professionals, it's also the case that some of the poorest performing services in terms of adding value to people's lives are also staffed by highly paid professionals. So, shirking the pain and rigour of hard thinking leaves us prey to superficial, almost sloganeering remedies. Another of these is reducing the number of community and voluntary agencies. Indeed, this almost commends itself as a no-brainer. Certainly, the development of locally responsive shared services that would reduce back-office costs would be a worthwhile achievement. But I think competently incentivised and executed, this could be achieved without calling for agencies to merge, to lose their identity, or to go out of business altogether. And in fact, an insistence on culling agencies in this sector is ill-judged, I think, and it's politically risky. Any of you who know this sector will know that the particular origins and ethos of groups there are very heartfelt. So I think this is a case where sometimes the no-brainer epithet contains a literal truth. The blanket application of crude percentage cuts is another example of avoiding serious thought. And what this does is that it acts as a disincentive to efficiency. It encourages agencies to maintain off-radar pockets of inefficiency, which they know they'll need to offer up for future rounds of cuts. So we need to develop the capacity to discern and moderate decisions on the basis of efficiency performance. Now, we often hear calls for more ruthless aligning of resources to national policy objectives, and I'm sure, Minister Fitzgerald, you're well aware of the difficulties of both collecting budgets around you and then trying to align budgets against specific objectives. Linking funding to validated delivery of outcomes goes hand in hand with this kind of exhortation, and Anne Connolly spoke about this very clearly from the back of the hall on Wednesday morning. Now, as high-level objectives, these are, of course, unassailable, but the complexity of challenge associated with any serious and sustained intent to deliver on these objectives requires sophisticated strategies that are adequately informed and considered. And clarity of thought and resilient resolve are just sine qua nons of serious endeavour to land such an ambitious programme of change. So, putting the citizen at the centre and taming the vested interests, which is what I called this presentation, the commitment to, and I quote, a more customer-focused approach to the delivery of public services, which puts the public at the centre of public services, was contained in towards 2016. Now, what social partnership delivered was what seemed to be win-win solutions for all concerned, except arguably for those in need of public services, and most notably for those who are marginalised and need support to become included as valued citizens. This theme is continuing, so the Croke Park Agreement refers to working together, focusing more on the needs of the citizen, building an integrated public service in this direction. I think it's fair to say, and I'm more confirmed having sat through some papers this week, that the jury is still out on whether Croke Park is being implemented primarily in the interests of the public or whether it represents a damage limitation vehicle for embedded interests. So given the different and conflicting interests, the only safe guide, I think, is to put the citizen at the centre of the design of public services, because this forces everybody else into the appropriate position, that of being of service. And of course, the most compelling case for reform is best put by those to whom it matters most. So putting the citizen at the centre of the design of services is important for quality. It also makes best use of resources. But critically, it offers another possibility for us, and that is that it could provide a common premise against which the contributions of all can be measured. Now, of course, for this to work, we need to make expectations explicit at the operational and the strategic level. But I believe, at least, that it's the lack of having any kind of common premise to work back to or forward from that's really at the heart of our difficulty in making progress in this country at the moment. So harnessing cross-sector collaboration and what we're doing in Genio. Just firstly I'm sure very few people in the room have heard of Genio, so just to explain. The impetus for Genio came about from three things. Firstly, the recognition that there are good and able people in every sector who want to make a difference, and that's what Paul and his colleagues are really trying to do and what we're all trying to help to do together. Secondly, there's a clear need for a better customer focus in the public service. And thirdly, a personal desire to work alongside others to make a difference to people who are marginalised. It was established in 2008, and our objective was to foster cross-sector collaboration involving key stakeholders to personalised services. Now, I was determined in putting it together that we wouldn't be another organisation offering commentary, that we would actually try and do something as useful as practically implementing national policy that is in the interests of people who are in danger of being excluded. So the sectors we're working with are public, private and not-profit. The fields we're working in so far are disability, mental health and older people, particularly focusing on those with dementia. And just to let you know that we currently have 47,000 people in the country with a diagnosis of dementia. And by 2041, that figure is going to rise to 147,000. So that's a number of us in this room. It's a very real challenge coming down the track. We've had some talks with people in the children's area, and we believe that the model that we've developed has wide applicability across the public service, particularly where the state has an interface with the citizen with an enduring vulnerability. So what we do is we act as a catalyst to reconfigure resources, to put citizens at the centre of the design and delivery of services. We develop a deep understanding of the fields we're invited to work in on the basis of the expertise we bring and also through consultation and research. We assess the capacity, the leadership capacity particularly, and the potential that exists in the field. And then we use that as a basis to agree targets with our funders. We bring government and private funding together. We're currently funded on the government side through the Department of Health and HSE, and by the Atlantic Philanthropies on the philanthropic side. And we're now open for business, as they say. We're opening up opportunities for other interested government departments and other private investors to talk to us if they feel we can help achieve a desired change. So just to give you a flavour of the kind of targets that that we've agreed. In disability, we're supporting people in a very person-centred way to move out from institutions, to live in the community, and to work or participate in education or training. And then in mental health, our targets include redesigning services currently provided in day hospitals and day centres so that the outcomes achieved are those that are critical and most important to the people who are receiving those services. And we've agreed those targets in the context of national policy. In the dementia area, we're developing and testing new service models and hoping then that the leadership that needs to be built across the field to help people remain at home, outside nursing homes, continuing to live the lives that they want to live, despite being diagnosed with dementia, that becomes possible, and then that this learning, it's intended, will inform the developing new national dementia strategy. So how do we do it? We work in three different ways. We provide financial support in the form of grants to reconfigure resources. And those grants are advertised nationally. They're evaluated against criteria that reflect national policy. Critically, people who access money through Genio have to have a really compelling sustainability plan to maintain that change beyond the life of a grant. So it's not good enough to come with a good idea and say, well, we'll use your money to do it and we'll have a raffle at the end. People really have to have a very good plan to sustain the change. So we've had 713 applications in the last 3 years since we've opened this. We've given grants of over 10.5 million. Just to give you a flavour, we have 145 projects that we've been so far able to support all around the country. The second thing we do is we build skills and leadership among key stakeholders. So key stakeholders are people who use services, their families and friends, and also service providers, policymakers and service commissioners. And finally then, we measure impact and gather evidence to support refocusing and scaling. So what are we achieving in real terms? Well, through the disability and mental health work, we've reached almost 14,000 people so far. I won't go into this slide in detail, but that just gives you a little bit of a breakdown of the kind of things that are happening within that group of 14,000. And then, of course, there are hundreds more who are in line to be helped through the dementia work. What we're really aiming to do is not have comprehensive coverage here. It's really to demonstrate enough good work so that momentum builds and then becomes self-perpetuating. So what's involved in cross-sector collaboration? And Caroline was very nicely commenting on process there and being a process entrepreneur. I think the first thing is you really have to understand the strengths that each sector can bring to bear on sustaining the solution. So the government's strength is its power to develop and implement policy and to provide the ongoing funding that allows for scaling up. The not-for-profit and voluntary sector brings the potential for innovating and relative flexibility in a less constrained environment. The private investor or the philanthropist brings goodwill and, crucially, funding. Also, organisations like Atlantic and Declan Ryan's One Foundation bring an additional rigour because they insist on measuring outcomes. So this kind of clarity doesn't leave any hiding place for fuzzy, long life, hard to measure objectives. I suggest that the private sector also has something else to offer, and that is its relentless focus on the customer. I think we would do well to take that relentless focus into the public and not-for-profit sectors or citizen sectors. As the title suggests, some walls need to come down for real collaboration to flourish. And I think these walls they essentially concern perceptions and sometimes prejudice. Public servants, for example, can be very wary of philanthropists getting involved. The questions they ask are, what are they going to do on our patch? Whose desk will I land this on? Can they be trusted to do something helpful that will contribute to implementing policy? Will we be expected to pick up the pieces when they leave, as leave they will? And how will we manage that aftermath? Public servants might regard not-for-profit or citizen sector organisations as sometimes helpful, potentially troublesome, not entirely house-trained. Private philanthropists might view public servants as ineffective, slow to act, and economically protected. They might view people in the not-for-profit sector as muddle-headed do-gooders, dedicated and compassionate, but perhaps as losers that couldn't really make it in the cut and thrust of the real world in which they live in. And those in the not-for-profit sector can view public servants as being more focused on protecting the interests of the state rather than on safeguarding its citizens. They might regard private investors as potentially helpful, suspect in terms of values at times, and they're wary of the over-application of business principles to a very different world. But within every sector, there are people who want to make a difference, and they understand that they will achieve much more by collaborating than they will do by going it alone. So finally, identifying the strengths and interests and possible barriers to cross-sector collaboration, they're important, but they only get you to the starting blocks. And developing collaborative options means actually meeting the interests of the various stakeholders. What we're doing at Genio is we're offering government a chance to reroute funding in a policy-bound direction through an independent vehicle that uses transparent, accountable and publicly defensible processes. We offer philanthropists and private business opportunities for high-impact social investment through our understanding of how positive change can be achieved and scaled through the relationships we have with statutory agencies and other key stakeholders. Crucially, we're providing opportunities to use private funding strategically to support projects that have a life after the grant runs out. Okay? For the general public, I think we're providing better value for money. And most importantly, for the person who needs the service, we're putting them at the centre of the design and delivery and putting them in the driving seat of their own lives, sometimes for the first time. I'm going to conclude there because time is running out. I think there is a 1-minute video that you were hoping you might be able to stream in from YouTube. So this introduces you to one person at least that has benefited through the work that we're doing, but is representative of many hundreds more. Conor is not completely confident that this might work. It literally is 60 seconds, so bear with it. Okay? Thank you very much. Genio works to ensure that people who are socially excluded get better lives. The socially excluded people we're concerned with are people who have disabilities, have mental health difficulties, are disadvantaged by lack of educational opportunities, are older.
I want to be like other people, living on my own in my own apartment and going out to work like everyone else, locking their door after them.
Tanya lived in a congregate setting in Rathfarnham with 40 or more people. She didn't have access to a kitchen, she didn't have access to a key for her own door. She couldn't lock her bedroom door at all. She had to write her name on her clothes so that other people wouldn't take them.
Well, Genio can be the catalyst for things to happen in this particular area. We can bring resources from the private sector, coupled with resources from government, to ensure that the needs of service users are met. And those needs are to live lives as full as they can in the community, just like we can.
Last year we allocated over 3.8 million in 50 grants to help people move in that direction.
And last Christmas I woke up in my apartment, in my own place, last Christmas morning, and it was a great feeling.